here with Charles, just getting situated, giving people time to come in. For those of you who are already here, thank you for joining. We'll get started shortly. Okay, Charles, I sent the information on Discord.
Am I there? I clicked on the link you sent. Am I on now? Can you see me?
Let me see. I can see you in Zoom, which is where you should be staying, but I'm trying to see what people can see live. Don't know why. Don't know why on the live you're not showing. Charles, come back on camera.
All right. Just give me a moment. So, how is it now?
I don't understand why you're not showing. Because I'm looking right at you in Zoom. You're there, but then I'm looking in. Okay, and then everyone there is saying they can hear you, but they can't see you. So I'm going to, okay. I think it might have been resolved because you just popped up on my end.
Okay, so can you see me now?
Come back on camera. I think you have to be on camera.
On camera.
Yeah.
So
okay, stay there for a second and let's see if that changes anything. Don't mind us, we're working out some technical kinks. Technology, what can you do? Okay. Hey, Mike, can you confirm that you can see Charles now? I think it's resolved. I think it's so long as you are on camera.
Okay.
Works. I'm trying to see live what's happening and I think it's resolved. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So just stay on camera, Charles. Okay.
Hi,
yes,
hi.
it's working now. Awesome. So welcome to the second live chat that I'm doing. I am honored and have the distinct pleasure of having a conversation with Charles Ekokotu, who is a writer, and also a fellow podcaster on the Critical African Thinkers channel. The link to his information and the book of which is going to be the subject for today will be in the description box promptly after this live. Without further ado, Charles, I want to welcome you to my channel. If you'd like, introduce yourself, tell the people who you are, what you're about.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Mason. I'm excited to be here on your channel. I'm excited to be talking to you. I remember the first time I saw a video of you on, I think with Brittany King, Kimi Katiti, and all that. And then it was actually announced that called my attention to the fact that you made some comments about my channel. I was excited. And I reached out to you and we did something very awesome in my channel. And you've been a very big part of what I've been doing on YouTube. And I value your opinions and your thoughts and your words full of wisdom and all that. So you sort of have made some introductions for me. Charles Ekokotu, a writer, I would say, I'm a writer, I'm a prose fiction writer, I'm a playwright, I'm also a poet. I have numerous works of fiction, of poetry, and plays, although I just have one published novel, which is going to be the subject of our conversation today. And so I am working on a lot of other things. And my goal is to, tell African stories to a global audience. I want to be able to translate the culture, the stories, the myths, the mythologies that we have in Africa. I want to be able to tell it to a wider audience. So currently, I'm working on a series of books which are based on African culture, myths, and legends, and they're going to be coming out pretty soon. So I want you guys to, follow this conversation because it's going to be a very interesting one today. Well, aside that, personally, professionally, I'm a pharmacist. I have a doctor of pharmacy degree from University of Benin, one of the foremost universities in Nigeria. So I work in the pharmaceutical industry, but this writing is my passion. Writing is cathartic for me. Writing is my
Hello.
I love reading and I love. Hello, I went out for a while, right?
Yes, it froze, and now it appears to be working again.
Okay, so Critical African Thinkers is a place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain that which is factual and logically consistent. So that is what I'm about. I think I've taken too much time introducing myself, so let's get into this conversation. Thank you very much, Dr. Mason, for having me.
Thank you for being here. And I appreciate the sentiment and the respect, but please feel free to call me Sheena. We are on a first name basis now. So for anyone out there watching, please excuse technology. This happens. We're in different countries, in different spaces, and technology. Technology is not our friend always, but Charles and I are going to persist through any technical glitches and continue the conversation. And we just appreciate your persistence and your patience. So the topic of today is Charles's first book, which is titled Hotel Shendam. Is that correct?
Yeah, Hotel Shendam. Yeah.
Shendam. So This book, I have to say, you chose the right person to come and talk with your book about, because I am in literary studies, right? This is what I do. I could say that I didn't know what to expect, but I had very high expectations, having had conversations with Charles. And from the first page to the last page, I was not disappointed. In fact, it was quite the opposite. I was very impressed. All of the kind things he says about me, the feeling is 100% mutual. I highly recommend this book. It's thought provoking. It's provocative. The language is really beautiful. So I know that many of you would enjoy reading the book as much as I did. And I don't want to give away all of the details of the book in this conversation. So we're going to try to keep this as macro as possible. One question I have for you, Charles, is which writers inspire your own writing, if any?
Okay, there are a lot of influences to my writing because growing up, I used to be an indiscriminate reader. I read everything I could lay my hands on, and my mom actually, she helped me in that regard. She used to buy these little storybooks. They call them storybooks in my country. She bought these storybooks for me, so I read all the time. And when I grew up to a certain extent, I would take money from her and go to the market. I would walk miles. I would walk miles to bookshops to buy these books and then come back home and read them. And as I grew older, my dad is a bibliophile too. My dad loves reading. He has novels. I think he loves reading more than myself. So he had huge collections of novels that I just binged on. So after that stage where I passed, where I graduated to reading much more technical novels, I didn't really buy novels because my dad's collections were there for me to read. And I till today, when I still go back home, I still borrow from his novels. I just pick one or two and then I read. So, but for writers that I love their style, I would say Dan Brown. Dan Brown is one person I can mention that I really love his style. Um, I also I love Daniel Steele. I like Robert Ludlum. Amish Tripathi is an Indian author. He wrote the Shiva trilogy. In fact, when I read the Shiva trilogy, it was so good that whenever I picked up a book and it didn't meet up to that standard, I lost interest in it. So it was like the book to end all books for me. It was so good. And then this other author, I'm trying to remember his name. He writes legal novels too. I think I just finished reading one of his novels. Trying to remember his name, but he's so good as well. He's so good. Maybe when I get his name, I'll tell you. So those are the authors that really inspired me. I look forward to reading. With Dan Brown, I love the way he was able to merge fiction with history. When you read his novels, Angels and Demons, and all that, he was able to weave fiction and history that you do not know where you can't even tell which is history, which is fiction. It was just seamless. So those are some of the influences in terms of writings for me. Yes.
That's so good to hear. And this is one thing I really love about literature. It brings people together. The joy that's in your voice and on your face as you talk about these writers and your memories growing up, having access to your dad's books and stuff. That really resonates with me because for those of you who don't know me, books were my primary source of safety and freedom when I was a child. They gave me access to a world that was far richer and far less traumatic and violent and limiting than the world in which I lived because I lived in a very abusive household. But I had the very good fortune of having access to any book I could have wanted. And I really attribute where I am today and the sort of passion I have for education to that experience and that feeling of the power of literature and the power of education as extended through reading, right? Reading and writing. So I love hearing about the writers that inspired you. I love hearing the little anecdote about your child, your dad's library, basically. I'm unfamiliar with Dan Brown, but you better know I'm going to become familiar with him after this conversation, because now I
You don't
want to
know
see.
that he wrote Angels and Demons.
What is it?
He wrote the Angels and
Oh,
Demons.
okay. I am familiar then. I am familiar. Interesting. Interesting. Angels and demons. I'm writing this down. I take notes. Um, yeah. So thank you so much for sharing some of that insight. Um, what genre would you place Hotel Shendam if you had to pick a genre? Like, what genre is it?
Well, the book was a mix of so many things. There was some romance in it. There was some historical stuff in it. There was some crime fiction, but principally I would say it's a crime fiction novel with very interesting historical debates enmeshed in it, and some human elements. I had to put in some emotion and some romance and all that. Although I'm not a very big fan of romance romance novels, but I thought it would make it much more human and relatable to incorporate those things. So I would say crime fiction. Crime fiction would best describe the book.
Yeah, I can dig that. As I was reading it, I was thinking of a few different writers like Chester Himes, who has a series of 5 detective novels. I was thinking of Percival Everett, an even more contemporary writer who has at least one detective novel. But then I was also thinking Edgar Allan Poe. The sort of gothicness, which speaks to the romance that's there, but it's this sort of grotesque romance, if you will. It's sort of complicated romance. So I was seeing threads of gothic throughout, and detective. Those were the two primary um, genres that I was kind of earmarking, just because, not because the category is the be all end all, right? But because I think in terms of giving people a little bit of what they might expect, it can be helpful, right? Because people tend to like crime fiction or they like detective stories, right? And then you have other people who might be more attracted to romance, who can find a very little bit of that in this novel. Um,
Yeah.
Something that comes out, again, not to give the entire plot away, but something that comes out between the characters, right? The big debate, something that comes out after that debate, there's a line that speaks to the power of conversation. And I think it's Kunle who talks about how he says something to the effect of, imagine if more people would have conversation, right? If they would actually speak to each other, and the ways that we see play out during the big debate. So I want to pick up on that thread and pull it a little bit and invite you to speak more about what inspired you to have that thread in the text in the first place. How is that connected to the work that you do on critical African thinkers and elsewhere? How does that tie to your analysis of American society and culture, for example? Just talk to us about that.
Okay. So one of the inspirations I had for writing this novel was actually um, the happenings in American politics. Um, there was this sense that blame for the outcome of a particular set of people was being placed on another set of people. I'm not going to mention names or categories, but blame for the outcome of one people was being placed on another set of people. So there was this dichotomy. This side was being defensive and this side was being accusatory. And both sides were just shouting at each other. They were not trying to understand the points, understand where each other was coming from. And I believe that both sides had valid points, but if they would just talk, they would see that they could come to a resolution. They could come to a middle ground that made sense for everybody, where everybody, you give a little of this and you take a little of that, and you come out better. So in that regard, I was although this novel predated my creating of critical African thinkers. Hello, Dr. Mason, you froze.
Oh, I'm still here.
Okay. So although the novel predated my creation of the channel, but it's something that had always been in me because in my much younger days, I was a very combative, a verbally combative person in terms of ideas. Um, I'm a Christian, but my particular set of beliefs as a Christian are not the mainstream Christian beliefs. So I would get into heated debates with other Christians and trying to prove my point and all that. I did that during my secondary school days, even while I was on undergraduate university. I did that. But as I grew older, I began to see that what's my goal? Trying to win an argument. Winning the argument doesn't mean that something productive has happened. It doesn't mean that the other side, we are now seeing ourselves as a better individual. I might win the argument and the other person just goes off with sore feelings and all that. So I thought, no, that wasn't the way to go for me. I think it was just sort of a maturation process for me where I'm more interested in the dialogue. I'm more interested in the idea because I believe that good ideas would ultimately prevail if the other person is being honest with their opinions. Somehow good ideas would prevail. And even if you do not accept my own position, but you can sympathize with my position because I've been able to articulate it very well. And I can possibly see your own position because you have been able to articulate it very well. And another thing I would tie to that is why conversations are good. In terms of, say, political leanings, if I wanted to put myself in the American sphere, I would say, okay, I tilt towards the right. But I find that since I began doing this podcast on YouTube and talking to more people, I think I'm going more. I'm being influenced more to the left, you understand, than I am to the right. And that would not have been possible if I did not listen to people who had different opinions from me. If I was not ready to listen to them, that would not have been possible. So I strongly believe in dialogue. I believe in civil dialogue. And another thing that also inspired me was when I listen to journalists. Most of the time, I am so angry. I'm so pissed. I'm so mad because they always come with an agenda. Um, Right-wing journalists, left-wing journalists. Nobody wants to have an honest conversation. Everybody wants to push particular points. Everybody wants to push an agenda. And I thought that, creating the platform or even speaking through my books, giving two different, I made strong, if you read in the book, I made very strong arguments for both positions. It was as if it was two different persons writing it. But I wanted to bring out the strongest arguments of both sides and let them see that, look, there's something to be gained in having open dialogue, which is what the world needs. We just need to talk to each other and try to understand where the other person is coming from. So that's it.
Yeah, so that's making me remember the outcome of the debate and the fact that the woman kisses both of the debaters as a clear signal that even to your own mind, neither of those characters necessarily won the debate because, as
Exactly.
the woman says, they both of their arguments had good merit, or had merit to them, I should say.
Exactly.
Interesting. I love it. So this question of the power of conversation, the transformative power of conversation, even just on an individual level, right? Being able to test one's own ideas. Because even if we ultimately come to the same conclusions after putting our ideas to the test, there's still value in testing our ideas, right? So I love what you're saying about how you've exposed yourself and continue to expose yourself even to voices or perhaps positions where initially you might automatically presume that you don't have anything common to them, right? In this instance, the left versus the right. in American politics. Because many people often make the presumption that if they identify on either side, the other side can't say anything that I can learn from, right? Or can't say anything that I can agree with. The tendency is to continuously subvert conversation and dialogue in any meaningful way, right? So this idea of holding your feet to the fire, exposing yourself to different viewpoints, not just viewpoints that you assume you're going to agree with, right? And test the bounds of your knowledge and your ideas. I think that if more people do that, if more people did that, the world would be inevitably a better place.
Yeah, and it also does something for you as an individual because you cannot truly know the validity of your arguments. You do not test them against competing arguments. So at times you get a clearer perspective on your own position when you engage in dialogue with other people. So it makes it clearer. There's this thing that says that when you teach other people a certain subject, you understand it better. I think it's the same thing with positions and dialogue. And that's why I hate echo chambers. I hate it with a passion. I don't want to be in a sphere where I listen to people who agree with me and what we just do is pat ourselves in the back and say the same things. In fact, once I hear a particular position or narration 2 times, by the third time, I get irritated by it because I want to move on to something fresh. I know this already. I don't want to listen to this anymore. I want something fresh. Maybe it had to do with something with my sense of wonder. As a child, I was very inquisitive, and my dad would always tell me, and my uncle, my late uncle, which was who I dedicated this novel to. He died last year of cancer, a very young man. He was, he and my dad were the two people I was always bombarded with questions. I just had this, I had this sense of wonder about the world, and I wanted to know more. I wanted to, get to know what's the next thing that excites me. So I was always seeking new information. So in that regard, I don't like hearing the same thing too many times. It just irks me. I want to learn something else. So talking with people, having a dialogue with people, it does that. And you come with it with no malice, with no ill intent. I always come to every conversation with, okay, I'm not trying to win, I'm trying to understand. And if your position makes sense, then there is really no reason why I should be obstinate about it. I can say for a fact that you have convinced me about the issue of racelessness. Before my conversation with you, I was of the opinion that race is biological. You can't tell me that race isn't biological. But I listened to your arguments and I listened to your positions, and I found that she's actually right. She's actually correct. And to that point, in a way, I actually believed what you were saying, but I wasn't able to articulate it in the sense of it being of racism creating race, because I listened to Thomas Sowell, and Thomas Sowell usually said something that the African Americans were not enslaved because they were Black. The justification for the enslavement came after that fact. So it wasn't because they were Black. That's why they were enslaved, you understand? So it is that demeaning or the racist attitude towards them that gave birth to them being classified later on as a separate race somewhat in America. And I understood that. I accepted that. Still, I accepted the opinion. I was of the opinion that race was biological. You can't tell me that I'm not different from a white person and all that. But I was able to engage with you, and you were able to change my mind. So that's a big plus for dialogue. So dialogue is good.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Charles, because that's not something you had shared before. And that makes me feel heartened that, I'm not talking and sharing and discussing these ideas with people for no reason, because I try not to look at it as, okay, my objective is to persuade people, right? I do look at it as my objective is to educate people. And if that education leads to persuade them to ascribe to a different position than they held when they first came in contact with me, then yeah, I mean, of course, I would see that as a fruitful thing because of my conviction that the way racism and race currently operate in American society is enabling the same system of racism to continue to persist, right? And until we get our hands on it better and have more generative conversations about the problems and so on and so forth, or have conversations at all, then we will continue to stay in this quagmire, and more people than not will continue to be disadvantaged because of the way that we view each other. So to me, this begs the question of racelessness then, and sort of your view on whether or not Africans, and then of course you can get specific about like countries, tribes, ethnicities, etc. If you view Africans as mostly viewing themselves as raceless in the kinds of ways that I imagine, as in like outside of the bounds of racism, if you will, at least outside of the bounds of the Americans type of racism, what do you say about that now?
Okay, so the concept of race, it's more a Western concept. I mean, I am very familiar with the racial discourse in America because I'm interested in American politics. But most people back here who are not plugged into that worldview, who are not so keen in that worldview, would not have that. They wouldn't have that concept of race. For example, yourself, Dr. Sheena, if you were to come to Nigeria and to Africa, you would be called a white woman. You would be called a white person. But in America, you're black. You're of another race. So for us, at times, we look at the countries of origin, we look at the ethnicities of people and say, okay, this person is this. In my country, we have over 500 ethnic groups, and we have different shades of skin tone, but never to us has it ever occurred that we have different races. We have the people that are as dark as myself to the Fulanis who are as light as maybe the Arabs up north. It's never been a point where they were classed as different races. In fact, two of the ethnic groups, the Hausas and the Fulanis, who are two distinct ethnic groups who somewhat look different from each other. The Fulanis are lighter skinned, the Hausas are very dark. They sort of have merged in Nigeria to form a super ethnic group known as the Hausa Fulani, such that when you see a Fulani man, you can say that's an Hausa man. You understand? So the concept of race in Africa, it's not something that is as real as you would get in the Western world. It's not something that's as real. So when people out here look at everybody in the West, what we see, these are white people. These are white people. It doesn't matter the shade of their skin and all that, or you're American, or you're British, or you're Chinese, and all that. So you're referred to either by your country or by your ethnicity. That is the way that we refer to people from this neck of the woods. But for people who are more, the rise of social media, when people go online and see these things, they can now start, okay, in America, something like this is happening. Something like this is happening. These people are classed as different races. But that's not the reality down here in Africa. So in a sense, Africa is raceless, if I would say so. In a sense, Africa is raceless. So the tensions that you have between groups is more ethnic tensions and communal tensions or clashes, not a race-based tension or race-based clash. In fact, to tell you how the concept of race doesn't even make sense to Africans, Chinese people are regarded as white. Indian people are regarded as white. Arab people are regarded as white. But that's not the case in America. You get, that's not the case in the West. Those people are classed as different races, but to us, oh, you're white, and that's it. So it's interesting when you go out there to the Western world and you see all these classifications and sub-classifications, and it wouldn't make sense to the average or the everyday Nigerian or so.
So just to clarify, because I gather what you mean, because we've talked very briefly about this before, but when you give the example of me coming to Nigeria and being considered a white woman, is that because I have fair skin, or is that because I'm American?
Both. So even if you were a shade lighter, darker, a shade darker, you would still be considered. In fact, those of us who marry Nigerians who marry white people, and they bring their kids back, their kids are regarded as white. Why in America they'll be black, but they are regarded as white, not really because of the heritage, but because they're sort of coming from a Western country. So it's when you look at the concept of the West, you just attribute it to these are white people. These are white. Right. Yeah.
It's interesting that because you mentioned that Chinese people would also be viewed as white. Does that apply to all of the groups who are racialized as Asian in the American context? Are they racialized as white?
Yes.
Is there a reason for that? Because I don't tend to connect most countries in Asia with the West, if that makes sense.
Yes, you would not connect. You wouldn't connect most countries in Asia with the West, but here we're looking at overseas versus in the continent of Africa. You understand, and also to the point that almost everybody outside of Africa is lighter than us. So right. By that default, they are white people.
Now let's complicate this a little bit. So we know that in many places, even if in most places on the continent of Africa, race operates where it exists, because I see race language, like the concept of white and so on, exists in use, but it's obviously very different from how it's used in America.
Yes.
What about the people, because I could point to South Africa as the best example of how race and racism do seem to travel there as a sort of connection to how it is in America. So what about, do you have any thoughts on like how are the white Africans racialized, if at all?
Okay, so it's good that you mentioned South Africa, because South Africa is sort of a unique case in Africa. You can remember that up until 1994 there was apartheid in South Africa, and that was strongly tied to the West. In fact, it wasn't the Africans doing the racializations; it was the Europeans who were in South Africa who brought in the racial categorizations, because in South Africa you have a lot of categorizations. The Indians, there are different racial categorizations in South Africa. So in that case, South Africa is unique. It is unique in that regard because it was much more aligned with the Western concepts of race than the rest of Africa, than other parts of Black Africa. And yes, you can still see today that a large proportion of South Africa has white people, indigenous white people, indigenous in quotes, because they are descendants of white people who have been there for, say for centuries and all that. So in that sense, it is not an African racialization. It's a continuum from the Western concepts of, of race language that you see in Europe, that you see in America. That was what was domiciled in South Africa, but you don't find in other parts of
Yeah, that tends to be how I think of it too. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on all things, global. I focus on I focus on the Americas and the Caribbean mostly. But as part of my exploration of different philosophies of race, I have gone outside of the space of America to examine, does race and racism travel? And where I find that it travels, as in where it also exists in a similar way to the American context, it is spaces like South Africa, who have a clear colonialist, imperialist, history in the same way or similar way to how travelers came and took made the Americas into the countries that they are now. And in that way, I think it's important, because if we recognize how looking at race and race, what I call racialist language on a global context, and if we come to find that the spaces where race and racism travel, as it is in America, we come to find that those things exist in similar or the same ways in spaces that have a similar history, but outside of those spaces, because not all of Africa has been colonized, right? Not all of Africa has been subjected to the will of Europeans, if if you will. So if that's true, I think that we can learn something from the fact that race, i.e. racism, don't exist everywhere. And where they do exist, there are shades, pun intended, of difference. Because like even in South Africa, at a very cursory research level, I learned that there are generally three categories. It's something like white, black, and colored. And that colored means something very different from what it has meant in the American context. And I'm like deeply interested in doing more research to figure out how race works there. But I think outside of examples like that we could point to in Africa, what you're saying rings true, because we have other writers, Nigerian writers included, like Chimamanda Adichie, who has the book Americana, in which she's exploring the fact that in Nigeria, the characters view themselves a particular way. Then one goes to London and one goes to like LA or something like that in the United States. And they both experience different things. And they both experience being sort of put into or subsumed by the racialist cultures around them in different ways. I don't know. I guess I say that to say the more we can relativize the existence and persistence of race and racism by looking at different places and looking at different times, I think it can go a long way toward expanding our understanding of how it works in America. Because to my mind, if we look Americans, we being Americans, if we look at Africa as the birthplace for Black people and Blackness, but then we come to find that most people from the continent, all different countries, don't view themselves as that, shouldn't that mean something? Like, can't we learn something from that? What do you think about? Am I just talking nonsense? What do you think about
Oh,
that?
no, you're not. You're not talking nonsense. And it's good you mentioned Chimamanda Adichie, because I think I should have mentioned her as one of my influences. So I read her book, Half of a Yellow Sun, when I think I was in undergrad, no, before I got to university. She's a beautiful writer. She knows how to use words. She knows how to capture emotions with words. So yes, so she is one of my influences too. Yeah, and to the point that she made that when we from the continent go to the west, at times we get confused with the whole racial discourse and the whole racial tensions and all that, because we just feel that all we see when we look at the West is a land of opportunities. That's what we see when most people that live here, once they're going to the West, what they're going to look for is a land of opportunity. They're going to look for better opportunities for themselves, financially, educationally, and all that. So they're not thinking in that sense of, when I get there. In fact, Vincent, who is a Nigerian, is a British-born Nigerian. He comes to my channel too. We've had discussions before, and he's currently studying in America. And he told me that when he got there, that some of the white people called him and told him that when they noticed that he was an immigrant, they called him and told him that he shouldn't be like the Black Americans or the African Americans. You get. And he also had similar comments from the African Americans about the white people. So he was thrust into that sort of racialized condition where it didn't actually mean anything to him coming there. When he got there or going there, he did not, okay, I have to start aligning with African Americans because we have the same racial or ethnic this thing. I have to. No, that was not his thought. It was in America there that line of thinking got ingrained into him. That's why probably first generation immigrants are usually much more attuned with their home country, and by the second or third generation, they started seeing themselves as African Americans, because somehow the environment changes you, the culture around changes you, and you start seeing yourself in that racialized way. But aside that, it's not something that occurs naturally to us without being sort of prompted into it. Yeah. So you were saying we're making perfect sense. Yeah.
Do you think so? Even earlier, you mentioned how before we started having conversations, you weren't necessarily initially persuaded by my theory of racelessness, right? Which cuts two ways. It speaks to what a person thinks race is, and it speaks to what a person thinks should be done with race. So in my instance, I argue that the thing that in American society we point to and we say this is race or this is racial, we say it's a social construction, but we talk about it in terms of nature, in terms of biology and all that other stuff. And I view it as a skeptic, which is to say that what we point to as race or racial in the US is actually racism camouflaging itself as race. Or so examples of this, right, would be if somebody tells me that I'm talking white or I'm trying to be white, right? Kind of interpreting and figuring out what does a person mean by that and what kind of power imbalance or dynamic are they writing into race. There's a hierarchy there, right? And then, or it's something ethnic or it's something cultural that's being misnamed as race or racial, because to your point, Africans, broadly speaking, are extremely diverse. We have diverse cultures, we speak different languages, we live in different nations, we have different ideas and ways of viewing the world. And so for something to be racial, then truly, one would think, if we follow that logic, that it would apply to the majority, if not every racialized Black person. So there's a way in which my skepticism speaks to this idea of racelessness, because ultimately I view us already as being raceless. But I recognize that people view it as something of nature. Like you said, thought it was biological, right? Or I recognize that some people view it as a social construction. And in that way, I argue that we need to eliminate the concept of race with the express purpose of undoing racism. That this debate about CRT, all of that stuff that's going on, some of the ideas that's being called anti-racism are actually allowing the problem of racism and division in the United States to persist and even deepen. So in those ways, I talk and think about racelessness. But I also recognize that in some spaces, like for you, when you spoke about thinking it was biological, to you, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but to you and from what I've heard you say, I interpret that as meaning something very different than what Americans think race is, right? Like for you, it seems more of a matter of fact, a statement, if you will, as opposed to signifying some kind of solidarity, diasporic solidarity, or some kind of cultural sameness, right? Like for you, it seems more descriptive versus carrying all that other stuff. Is that accurate?
Spot on. You're spot on. You're very correct in that analysis. And one of the reasons why race even occurred to me in the first place, like I said, was my interactions with American politics and Western views and ways of thinking. While I was also growing up, I still do love it. I love peoples and history, peoples and cultures. So I read about cultures all around the world. In fact, my first history book, I would say, is the Bible. I was obsessed with, reading about the stories of the Jews, or the Hebrews, the Egyptians, and all that. So I read a lot about different cultures all around the world. So that gave me, a broader understanding of what other cultures are than with the American. But when I speak of race, like you said, I'm not speaking of it as a form of solidarity. I'm speaking of it as a form of, okay, well, obviously my skin is black. Obviously, the white man has straight hair, and obviously my hair is kinky. So there has to be some biological basis for that difference. You understand? But speaking with you, I got to understand that skin color and hair texture are just one of the many differences that differentiates humans. There are other things that differentiate humans as well. So possibly race could have been built on something else. Could have been built on height. It could have been built on, it could have been built on the shape of the nose. It could have been built on some other features which differentiates human beings. So human beings differ in various manners. Even within Africa itself, you can almost tell by looking at a person what tribe they're from. You get. So race could have been built along that line. So why pick skin color as as the basis for this categorization, this racial categorization? So in that sense, yes, you're correct. Yeah.
Yeah, because I've been talking, actually just before you and I got on, I was talking with somebody who's from Jamaica. She's been in the States now for long enough. And she expressed the sort of disjuncture that she experienced, similar to Vincent's initial experiences, where, and she happens to be married to somebody who's African American, and she spoke with me about how they really view America in very different ways. She says, because coming from Jamaica, and she's not the first person from Jamaica I've heard articulate this. She said, coming from Jamaica, she viewed it as more matter of fact. And she said, in Jamaica, you don't even think about race. Like there are all kinds of different people there, right? Like Indian, Chinese, African, etc. But that there's a class system, right? She talks about hierarchies. It's not to say it's a paradise. I don't want to give anyone that misconception. It's not to say there's a paradise there, but the way that she's racialized in the context of the United States, she finds very troubling, because it's like the antithesis of what she knows and how she thinks of people, how she thinks of herself. And she also spoke about something that you talk about often on your channel, which is this viewpoint of victimhood and victimization, the sort of detrimental impact that has. Like she and her husband have a child now, and they have different opinions about the information that they want to share with the child, how they want to share it. She actually was telling me she wants to get back to Jamaica sooner than later, because she doesn't want to raise her son to have this sort of like lacking ideology that he attaches to who he is and how he can be, or his future, or anything like that. So it's a very interesting conversation because, again, she's not the first person specifically from Jamaica who's expressed those kinds of ideas. But then hearing from your perspective as well, and then having read literature more broadly from other Nigerian writers and stuff, it is this common thread of, number one, being fascinated by race in the American context because of the fact probably that it operates in ways different from what one is used to if you're not here, right? What do you I've been itching to talk with you about this idea of your critique of CRT and the sort of disagreements that are going on. I'm sure you know that there are, I guess, like the FBI issued some kind of statement talking about they're going to start investigating parents who go to the school board complaining about CRT. The FBI is now getting involved, right? So things are really tense here. I see a smile. It makes one smile. Things are really tense here. But what, from your perspective, what are your biggest points of contention with CRT and anti-racist discourse as you're seeing them from Nigeria?
Okay, my first instinct would be to say first world problems. I mean, to us, that's not a problem. I mean, it's not. And I've engaged enough with people about this CRT, and I still don't really know much about it because it's so confusing. But at least maybe I can say the little I understand about it is, trying to critique a social structure via a racial lens, or try to critique things via a racial lens, trying to understand things via a racial lens. So, for example, if there are disparities between two racialized groups, trying to understand how the race of those individual groups contributed to the outcomes of those distinct groups. Now, in a theoretical sense, well, it's a tool of analysis. Fine and good. You can do all that if you want to, and there are definitely evidence to show that the past, the way people were treated in the past, somehow carries to how their outcome in the future. So I cannot certainly not deny the fact that race and racism had a role to play in the outcome of African Americans today. But this is 2021. This is not the 1800s. This is not the 1900s and all that. And as much as we understand that fact that those things can affect today, but also look at where you are today. What are the gains that have been made? I think people should emphasize more what are those gains that have been made. You can have a very dispassionate and very logical view of, okay, this is where we used to be. It was terrible. You understand? But this is where we are now. It is good. It is beautiful. How can we build upon this? How can we make it better? You understand? How can we move from this? But when you are fixated on the past, and this is one of the contention I have with Stanley in the Discord, because I usually tell him that he has a castle in the past. Yes, because you want to use examples of what happened in the past to explain what is currently happening right now. It's not going to work for me. I'm not going to take that explanation. I even though I can see that there are residual influences, but I think that today's society is different from 200 years ago. It's different from even 20 years ago. There's a lot of progress that has been made from 20 years up until this point. So people should emphasize more the achievements. African Americans, they are, in the words of Glenn Lowry, they are the wealthiest people of African descent in the planet. By God, they're living a good life compared to many people around the world. So that's why it might seem as if those of us from Africa are not sympathetic to their cause when we say Why you're living in the sort of the greatest country in the world if you want to believe Americans when they say, yeah, country is the greatest country in the world. So it means that there are a lot of opportunities that are open to you. So have you taken advantage of those opportunities? So that's typically where a Nigerian will see it from first. You understand? So that would be my critique of it. I think that it should be de-emphasized. I don't see a reason why the FBI is getting involved in something like this. I mean, parents have a right to choose like what they want their kids to be taught. They have a right to do that. They have a right because they're paying school fees to the school. They are stakeholders in the school, so they have a right to say, with what's going on? What are you teaching our kids? You get, and they shouldn't be investigated for that. It's so it's funny to me, and if I would say, not being dismissive, a little bit ridiculous that the FBI will get involved in something like this.
Yeah, I I would say that something like the theory of racelessness would go a long way to giving more people what they actually want than how CRT is being practiced, because I think most people are clear that what's being called CRT isn't actually like the formal legal studies CRT, right? How it's being practiced and what is being called CRT to most critics' minds is problematic, not because it focuses on the problem of racism or the existence of racism or the history of it, but because they view it as continuing racism, right? Like if I'm a racialized white student, I'm being cast a certain way and I am not given the space to exist outside of the system of racism because racism creates race. And in that way, if I'm a racialized Black student, it works the same way. Same for a racialized Asian. It's like the critique that people who are speaking out against CRT are expressing, we would do well to listen and take heed, because even if we don't think that they are speaking out of good faith, which I have no reason to believe that they're not speaking out of good faith, right? But this is the presumption that a lot of people on the left tend to make. Even if we don't think they're speaking out of good faith, what they're saying is actually true upon further analysis. Like in teaching race with the expressed intent of teaching about racism, you're teaching racism. You are teaching students, you're teaching young people to continue to work and think along these racial racist lines, for better or for worse. And so long as we continue to do that to our young people, that's not liberation, that's not resistance, that's not righting the wrongs. That's literally writing the hierarchy onto young people so that it continued to persist as a problem in the future. And some of the things you've expressed, like for me, there's nuance to this view of viewing oneself as victim or victor, right? A person can be both at the same time, but there is a way in which, under the guise of progressiveness, under the guise of liberation, we continue to promote and uphold this idea that in order to achieve some kind of success against the problem of racism, we have to still racialize ourselves and other people. We don't have an option. The individual doesn't matter as much as a collective matters, or I don't have power as an individual because society is doing something to me, right? Because of how I look. So that the cause ends up being race as opposed to racism. I end up being the cause for your bad behavior, right? And if I'm the cause for your bad behavior, I can literally never escape your bad behavior because I can't control you, right? And I can't change you. And I also, to some extent, am limiting my viewpoint of future possibilities based on something that is so external from me, like you, the bad racist person or racist system, right? So there's a way in which all across the board, what's lacking from our current efforts, first world problem or not, what's lacking from our current effort is this willingness to have conversation, this willingness to come from a place of empathy and compassion, to give each other the benefit of a doubt, this willingness to seek out alternative ways, alternative philosophies of race, thereby helping us actually address the problem of racism in a way that actually is generative for more people than not, because we're teaching self-empowerment. We're teaching children and young people that they can exist outside of the bounds of racism, right? And by racism, I'm meaning also race, right? Because to me, they're the same. So there's a way in which I have appreciated the nuance that you've given on your channel when it comes to different topics. And I also add my own nuance to suggest that there are even more gray, like nuanced areas that continue to be just overlooked and ignored, because for all intents and purposes, Americans tend to think in very black and white terms, but it doesn't have to be this way. And so hopefully somebody out there is heartened by anything I said or what you're saying, because we're pointing to the fact that it doesn't even operate this way everywhere we go. Even in the motherland of blackness, right? Like that's how Americans think. Even there, the mother of blackness, race doesn't even operate in the same ways there. And so we can heal together, and we can get to a place of actual unity and recognizing each other's humanities, Charles. And I'm sincere in my belief that it can happen. I'm sincere in my belief that, even us just coming together and having conversations, regardless of our political leanings and what country we live in and all this other stuff, like regardless of any excuse we could come up with to not have a conversation, we have a conversation. And we talk about ideas that are interesting to us, or we talk about things that are important to us. And we can disagree about any number of things, but we still have a conversation, and we're still respectful. We're not name calling, then hang up on you. Like it's silly, but like that's the kind of behavior we promote in response to what's being called racism. It's like, no, we can, outside of the context of racism, outside of the context of black and white, we would call that bad behavior. But because racism is involved, it's like the rules change. So after my sermon, I have another question for you that's related.
Okay. Yeah, before you go to that question, let me
yes.
I think that the people who it will be in their best interest to sort of, do away with race are sort of the ones that are perpetuating the idea of race. Okay, take for example, someone like Meghan Markle. She is regarded as black. Why is she regarded as black? She has a white father, and she has maybe a mother who is mixed as well, but she's regarded as black. If you trace back down to history, you have the one drop rule where no matter how white a person is, they are considered as black as long as they have one drop of, I think, 1/16 or 1/8 of African ancestry. In this age, why would someone perpetuate that racist idea or philosophy till this age? So you're sort of aligning with the racists of the past by maintaining these structures. Now, let me tell you how that would have played out in a place like Africa. Meghan Markle has a white father and has a black mother. Barack Obama has a black father and has a white mother. Barack Obama in Africa will be regarded as black because he has a black father. Because for us, you get your ethnic identity from your father. Meghan Markle will be regarded as white because she has a white father. Because in Africa, your ethnic identity is defined by your father. In Africa, even though different ethnic groups have their stereotypical looks, when two people of different ethnic groups get married, It doesn't matter how the child turns out. If, for example, let's say a Yoruba man and a Hausa woman got married and they give birth to a son, and the son looks more like the mother's tribe, he looks more than stereotypically like the mother's tribe, he's still going to be regarded as part of the father's tribe, no matter how he looks. And nobody's going to deny his being a part of that tribe. Nobody's going to question it that you look like these other people, so long as your father is this tribe. You understand? So at times, the people who is it's in their best interest to just do away with these racial categories and all that. They sort of they're sort of either subconsciously perpetuating these racial categories. But take for example, if something like that was implemented in America, Barack Obama is a black man, Meghan Markle is a white woman. They are both a shade of brown somehow. It messes with people's head. So if you wanted to be racist against a white person, and you know that a white person can be as dark as Obama or can be as white as Tucker Carlson, it sort of just it messes up the whole idea of fixed categorizations that you find in America, because to me it seems that the only group that is regarded as the pure is the whites. So for you to be a white person, you have to be pure. That is eugenicist. That's racist actually. You have to be pure. You have to have ancestry from Europeans. You have to have both your father and your mother and your grandparents have to be purely European. But to be black, you can have one ancestor from 3 generations ago who is black, and you're regarded as black. And we don't see a problem with that. We don't see a problem with that kind of categorization of things. Isn't it something that Hitler himself would agree with? That for you to be white, for you to be an Aryan, you have to be pure-blooded European. So I think people should begin to think more in that regard, that we should not perpetuate the categorizations that was fostered on society by racist people in the past by adopting some of these things that are currently going on. So I just wanted to chip that in before your next question.
Yes, thank you. No, that really highlights part of my central points in terms of why I say racism creates race, right? And so in teaching race and forever talking about race, in misidentifying the problem, talking about the problem of racism in the language of race, like CRT folks are doing primarily. CRT, I don't even like calling it that because I know that's not what's actually being practiced, but at least if I use that language, people will know what I'm pointing to, right? It's like, if we really do a historical analysis for who decided race, how did it come about, Thomas Sowell, Barbara and Karen Fields, Martin Delaney, who was writing during the time pre-emancipation, these people all point to the fact that the concept of race existed before chattel slavery. And within the American context and the context of other like Latin American, Caribbean spaces, the idea of race, the word race, was then codified in the ways that we think about it now in America. And that being the case, the one drop rule that you point out, the whole idea in creation, I mean, this is a fiction like a unicorn, right? The whole unicorn of the one drop rule is such that it's supposedly supposed to be scientific. It's supposed to be something biological. That's been long since disproven. But it was primarily used to indicate which people can remain enslaved and which ones can't. Like, was there a certain point in which a person starts to be white, right? If the so-called Black ancestor is far enough in the past, can a person start to be white? And how many generations does that take? And all of that other stuff. And the ultimate conclusion by these people who were really working to justify enslavement of human beings was that one doesn't stop being Black. If you have any ancestry that goes back to Africa, you are forever and always Black, which meant that you were forever and always justified as being enslaved. But then we take that idea of the one drop rule. We take the language that comes with it, right? Black, white, colored, brown. We take all of that with us, and then we come to use it as a form of resistance, because we say, okay, this thing was created to oppress me and enslave me. But as an act of resistance, I'm going to accept what society has decided, and I'm going to flip it on its head and start to write my humanity as it exists into the idea of race. And so in that way, many people are trained to be what's called Reconstructionists. And part of the problem, though, remains the fact that racism created race as we now think of it, and we tend to look at it and talk about it as objective reality. To your point, there have been people racialized as Black in American society who, if you and I looked at them today, if the majority of people looked at them today, they would be like, that is a racialized white person. Walter White, these are examples I always give, so people on my channel, they know the names by now. Walter White, Charles Chestnut, Gene Toomer. Look these men up. They look like white men for all intents and purposes. But these men, if you look at their Wikipedia pages, they are identified, at the time it was Negro. Now they're identified as Black or African American because it's conflated. And it's like, you would think, Charles, that would problematize people's viewing of race in America. But it seems like we've just, to your point, it seems like many people have just held on to the idea of race even harder and put even more, like a disproportionate amount of weight into their so-called race categories, to the point where it defies logic in a lot of ways. It breaks down, if anything. You know, you talk about whiteness as the idea of purity and stuff like that, that remains. And very few people seem to interrogate those things, or if they interrogate, if they ask questions, they are automatically identified as being racist or white supremacist or anti-Black. All of the language that ends the conversation, right? And few people seem willing or even able to imagine a future in which America does have a full reckoning with the problem of racism and encourages its citizens to embrace and accept their own individual power, their own individual role in the larger society, in a way that is more liberatory, that exists outside of the problem of racism that race creates. And Stanley, you mentioned him early, he asked a question in the chat box, and it was something to the effect of, is it possible to teach American history without race? So this is the question that I get posed more often than not. And the answer, as I would say it, is clearly yes. My answer is always yes. It is possible, because there's a distinction between teaching race and teaching people to racialize themselves, therefore upholding the problem of racism, and stepping outside of those bounds, freeing people from the category of whiteness, freeing people from the category of Blackness, all of that stuff, with the express purpose of talking about racism as a historical concept. There is a difference, and more people would get what they want. As you indicated, Charles, this idea that the people who would probably benefit the most from letting go of the categories often insist on saying in the quagmire, whether subconsciously or intentionally, that's part of the problem, right? Because people have a hard time seeing how we can still have a full reckoning with racism and not be part of the problem. To not have to unteach our children later in their lives, for them not to have to unlearn everything, to basically not be racist. We could just not teach them to be racist in the first place, right? We can do that. And this can become a thing of the past and a historical concept if people were willing to open their eyes to the evidence and willing to imagine a world in which more of us get what we actually want. That's my perspective. But sometimes I just think I'm dreaming. Maybe I am just dreaming, Charles.
Yeah, I agree. We're dreaming, if you're dreaming, I'm dreaming with you. We're dreaming together.
So one question I have, which actually speaks to this point, is from your analysis and what you do know and how you see the world, what do you think the expectation is in terms of when racialized Black people in American society will feel like there has been success as it pertains to racism? Because something you spoke about was like this idea that what's left out of these conversations more often than not are all of the positive attributes of American society and culture and things of that nature. And you spoke about how the hyper focus seems to be on all the negatives, right? And it's not to say there aren't negatives, but it is to say that a healthy mix of how we look at things can influence and inspire each of us, right? So what do you think the expected outcome is?
That's a tough question. It's a tough question, which I don't think I can answer because I'm actually not African American. So they are the ones that are going to decide, what is the metric for us saying we've achieved enough, that this fight has been won, or we've landed significant victory, and maybe we can, move past this conversation. Because I'm going to do a podcast on this soon, but one of the issues I have with movements, with any movement at all, is that they will ultimately become corrupt, in my opinion, somehow, because at times they don't know when to stop. They don't know when they've achieved their goals. So it just turns into something else. I believe if Martin Luther King was living in today's America, he would be glad for the progress that has been made. He would be astonished at how much progress African Americans have made. But yet you still get the feeling that there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the outcomes of African Americans. And I think this is the question that you asked Stanley too in Discord, that what exactly is going to happen for you to tell us that what are those things that you want to see change for you to actually say, okay, we have reached a critical mass in terms of achieving our goals, so we can sort of de-emphasize this conversation and move on to something else. So I don't know when that is going to happen, if ever it will happen, especially with the rise of social media, or with the rise of, with partisan politics, so with the way journalism is so this dichotomy. There's so much people are just entrenched in their positions, and by the way people are making money off this, of these racial tensions. Whenever there are tensions, there are people who are going to be making money off it, and they are perfectly okay with foiling these racial tensions so long as they're making money from it. So if you have a conservative news network that wants to play to their audience, they're going to say all the things that that the audience want to hear. Same thing can be said on the left and all that. So I don't know, frankly. I frankly do not know when that point will be reached. I frankly don't know if that point will ever be reached, but I'm hoping it is. I'm hoping we get to that point where these things become de-emphasized and people just see themselves as people. First of all, we're all people. First of all, before we are Black, before we're male or female, before we're anything, we are people, and that should be primary.
Yeah. Yes, your point is well taken. That you are speaking from a sort of outsider perspective, right? But I think that can often produce more generative conversations, right? Because you aren't somebody who's necessarily entrenched or have skin in the game, if you will, in ways that people within American society do or feel that they do. This is a question. So yes, I asked this question of Stanley in the Discord. For anyone interested, I'll put the Discord information. Charles, if it's okay, it's actually Charles's Discord, but I have a thread in there. And so I participate pretty heavily in that Discord. I'll put that information in the chat box. I mean, in the description box. But yeah, I asked Stanley that question in the chat box, and it has been a question that has been, I've become like semi-obsessed with the question and asking people the question and getting feedback from various people, because I don't think it's a question. It's certainly not a question that's been posed to me before. And I don't think it's a question that's posed to many people. Like, a common response I get is, wow, I've never been asked that question. I never thought of it.
But I think I can think of one response that some African Americans would say. They would say, when you pay reparations,
yeah,
then it's going to solve the racial tensions. But I don't know. I don't know if that is really going to do it.
yeah.
I don't know.
You're right. But then you have people like Coleman Hughes who come, his firm position is that even with reparations, people are going to be dissatisfied, right? That's not going to solve the problem. So you're right. That might be some folks' responses. Other people say things like, for there to be no racism ever. Now,
which is
listen. So this is the most fascinating part of this dialogue, because for me anyway, because I think if that's the goal, then we should be really cognizant and aware that that is our expressed goal, which should then help us be aware of the fact that we will always be dissatisfied and discontent and unhappy, that we will always view ourselves as, yes, victims of oppression, as subjugated, as second-class citizens. And in that way, I'm encouraging people to have more concrete expectations that have less to do with what happens outside of oneself and have more to do with how liberation, I think, is psychological ultimately in a lot of ways. I think it's twofold, right? I think it's societal and I think it's individual, and in that way psychological. And I think that one can have a sort of individual liberation that is not necessarily expressed by the society at large, but I think in each person liberating themselves from certain ways of thinking or certain racialist ideology, in that liberatory effort, if we are brave enough to speak out loud, to speak our ideas out loud, even before we feel like we're experts on the subject, right? If we're just able to talk through, because as you said earlier, there's this saying, or studies show, that if you're talking about something, then it helps you learn it. If you're as a teacher, the more I get to talk about any particular thing, the more I'm learning about that particular thing, right? So there's a way in which the more we embrace people asking questions, people testing their ideas, their beliefs, the more we embrace open dialogue, the more we embrace who each other are, our varying opinions about the same thing, right? I think, and the more we ask ourselves the questions of what does success look like, then I think we'll be that much closer to success. Because if we recognize that we have such an unrealistic goal of expecting 100% of human beings in American society to think the same way about any topic, never mind racism, right? Like to agree that at this time of day in this town, the sky is this specific shade of blue. Like, we can't even agree on that, right? Like, because that's so subjective. We can agree it's blue, but we can't agree about the specifics. And maybe some people will look at it and say it's gray. I don't know. That's a thing. So it's like, if we can't even agree on that, I think it is unreasonable. We are setting ourselves up for failure and disappointment and constant viewing ourselves through this like racist lens and limiting ourselves and limiting our future. Because again, this sort of impracticality of that expectation. And there's also studies that show people who put their happiness always in front of them, like, I'll be happy when I get my master's degree. Then it's, I'll be happy when I get my PhD. Then it's, I'll be happy when I get the job of my dreams, right? I'll be happy when I'm married, when I have children. People who are always, there's difference between having goals, right? And resting your happiness on achieving those goals and then moving the goalpost further into the horizon. There's a danger in that. And that is, I see that as really detrimental to ourselves, to our youth, to how we see things, because we are almost ensuring our constant and persistent dissatisfaction and resistance. And that is not to say that I don't wish that we could get everyone to not be racist. Sure, like that would be that, I wouldn't complain if it happened.
I think that the goal is a fantastic goal. In fact, that is the Christian goal. I mean, that is, that is a religious goal. The idea of Christianity is to bring people to perfection. But even Christianity recognizes that in this system of things that people cannot be perfect. You understand? It makes allowances for it. Perfection can only be achieved for those who believe in the other world, in the world to come. So when you are looking at getting perfection in this world, it's almost like you are usurping the authority of God, because you cannot. There is no way you can have that perfection, and America is the worst place for you to want to have people to think in exactly the same manner, because if there's anything I know about America is that you have 50 states who came together. You don't even have the same laws that cut across all the states all the time. Yeah. These states are sort of like semi-independent countries of their own. And within states and counties and all that, there's this distinction. So how are you going to enforce that? And from a human perspective, you cannot actually force a human being to think or to behave in a certain manner. You can't. It's impossible. You can't do that. And I don't think that should be a goal of forcing every human being to be in a certain manner. You understand?
Yes.
The society should be structured in such a way that, the best qualities of people are brought out, but you're still going to find people who would be, deviants. You're still going to find people who would go against the grain of society. It's human nature. So if you had asked me that when would racism be eliminated, I would say never, because as long as we're humans, you're going to have dickheads. You're going to have stupid people. If you ask me when is violence going to end in this earth, I would say never. If you ask me when is robbery going to end, I would say never. Those things can be minimized, but in my opinion, I don't think as long as humans exist and as long as our human nature is a factor in our behavior, as long as we do not become robots who are pre-programmed to do a certain thing, then you're going to, from the religious perspective, our basic nature, first of all, rebelled against the creator of the universe in the Garden of Eden. We rebelled even at that time when we had perfection. Not to think of now that we don't have perfection. You get? So it's a good goal. I would say it's a good goal. I wish there were no racists. I wish there were no criminals. I wish there were no terrorists. I wish everything was rosy and people were nice and they're good. Yes, I wish that, but sadly, that is not the reality of human condition. We can only minimize it and get better at it. And we should try to keep getting better at it. We shouldn't stop, but we should recognize our limitations and take the win that we have while striving for something better. Yeah.
Yes, I love it. That's critical, because it's not only, we're also usurping our own humanity, right? In having this sort of express goal and not resting, and then having that outcome or lack of outcome, if you will, as somehow dictating or influencing and inspiring us to think of ourselves in a particular way, it's like we're also then not in very paradoxical ways recognizing each other's humanity, recognizing the fact that human beings will never agree on any topic 100%, and human beings are imperfect and we're sinners and so on and so forth, because we're human, right? And that I can love my fellow person despite the ways in which I believe that they fall short, right? Because we each have our own code of ethics and
Exactly.
morality that come into play. But that needn't stop me from loving you. That needn't stop me from having conversation with you. That needn't stop us from having shared goals. And I think if we insert more love, it sounds floofy. I kind of chuckle at myself when I say this because I find myself saying it often. But if we insert more love into this discourse and what people are trying to accomplish, I think it would also bring us further. Just as you inserted the right amount of romance into your novel, it's like the right amount of love, we put it in there, we would get further, because I don't think we teach each other how to love unconditionally. And that's why the divorce rate in American society is like really high. One reason I would say, because we tend to love people with conditions. We even tend to love ourselves with conditions, right? But if there's a way in which we could insert love into this discourse and insert humanity through the theory of racelessness, it's actually more practical and feasible to do those things, then we can really start to get somewhere. And we can be less impacted by the sort of bad behavior of any individual, right? While still recognizing that that individual exhibited bad behavior. But that doesn't have to make their bad behavior doesn't have to make me feel some type of way, if that makes sense. To me, I think that also speaks to liberation.
Yeah.
In the oops, sorry.
Okay, so what you just said now, it reminded me of a poem that I wrote way back. I said that people say that love is blind, but I think not. I think love sees the other person just as they are, tall or short, black or white, male or female, but decides to love them anyway. That, I think, is the beauty of love. So to the point that you made, love should not be conditional. It shouldn't be conditional on me agreeing with you. That's why I have to love you. I can love you despite your shortcomings. In fact, that's the basic nature of human beings. Our parents love us, even though we are imperfect. There are some things that we do that irk our parents. We love our parents too, even though they're imperfect. So we're not going to say, I see this trait in my father, so I'm not going to love him anymore. We already do that. We already love people unconditionally. So let's spread it more to other things that we do not really agree with. And that way, that's even the answer. Love is the answer, because you're trying to formulate policies, but forgetting that everything happens at the individual level. If I decide to spread love to people around me, that's one person short from being an asshole. You understand? That's if I decide to spread love to people around me and don't harm them, don't steal from them, and everybody decides to do that, it solves all the problems of society. It solves all that. So that was an incredibly important point that you made about love. Yeah, so I agree.
This comes out in your novel. I would have guessed that you would agree for a lot of reasons, but it comes out in your novel too. So it comes out even through your imagination when the first person who's accused, who's almost being arrested in the novel, embraces. His name is Kunle, right? Am I misremembering the other character's name? Did you nod?
The first person who was accused. No, that's not. Kule
No,
is the main character.
Kunle is the one who gets him released.
Yes.
When Kunle embraces the guy who was getting first accused, and it's this sort of really sweet tender moment, and the prose of it is like, okay, they embrace each other until they've both had their fill, and then they separate. That was a really tender moment. I felt like there was a lot going on there, especially because that was standing in conjunction with the debate, but also after the debate, they embrace, they hug, right? That's sort of how that comes to a conclusion. And so, yeah, it's like even through the fictional world of Hotel Shendam, it's literally love is like the common thread weaving throughout all the way until the end. I Because I brought this back to your novel, I have to ask you to explain the title to me, because it ends in a particular way. And I tried to Google the answer so that I wouldn't have to depend on asking you, because I tried to be a good student, right? But I couldn't find anything that was satisfactory outside of the fact that it's a place. And I was like, clearly there's more meaning here. So give me some insight. Like, what is Shendam? Does it mean something? And then is it connected with your interest in history? Like, what is going on?
Well, it's nothing that deep. Shendam is a place in central Nigeria, north central Nigeria, a place called Jos. It's a town actually. So basically, why I said I titled it as Hotel Shendam, because most of the things that happen in the novel take place in that hotel, in that particular place, in my head, that fictional place in my head. So, well, let me name it after that place. I named the hotel after the place, and then name the novel after that. So it wasn't something that deep. Yeah.
Got it. Because I didn't know, because I couldn't find much information on my friend Google, I didn't know if there was something historical that had happened at the place that was also reflected within the novel, because they do go into a lot of history there, right? And interpretations of history. So I had to I had to know if there was some deeper significance, if you will.
And at times I like to just throw things that are ordinary, and they're not so big in terms of revelations, but putting the simple with the big and the complicated makes it much more balanced.
Yeah,
so
I can dig that. Yeah, that makes sense to me, actually. And it also makes it kind of ironic because of the discourse of the novel and the kinds of tensions that are going through. And then for it to end like that, and then to hear from the author himself, like how that came to be.
I like, at times, I don't know, I like edgy writing. And I think you must have seen it in my book. And I'm trying to tell myself to be less edgy in my writing, but that's what excites me. I don't want a very straightforward, plain, no, I need something I want that tension. It's the tension that when the tension is resolved at the end, then you get a bigger payoff than if it was just plain. And so, yeah.
I was wondering if you were going to give away in terms of the crime fiction aspect of it. I was wondering if we were going to know definitively if the right person is arrested or not. And so, yeah, it's definitely a book where I felt satisfied at the end, as opposed to still wondering and trying to reconcile and things like that. And it did make me think about, okay, is the author invested in any particular side, right, in terms of the debate and that kind of thread? Are you invested in that? And then I wondered if you saw yourself more in any of the characters that you created.
Well, I would say yes, but I'm not going to give away who I saw myself more.
It's gotta be the detective by nature, as opposed to the official detective. It has to be, because as I was reading that character, I was thinking of you, because I have the privilege of interacting with you. So I was like, this is probably himself in the book, because writers can do that sometimes, right? Yeah. And I suspect by that, that face that I'm probably onto something. But for the people who haven't read the book yet, I won't give away which character I see Charles in. And then the ending, the about the author, is the last page of the version that I have. I have the Kindle version, but I'm now gonna buy the hard copy. But so I could read it faster, I end up getting the Kindle version. And I'm hoping the hard copy is in the same order and it has the about author page, because it's such a beautiful picture of you. And reading that you aspire to be a world renowned author, it made me really smile. It still makes me smile, because when I read the book from start to finish, I had that feeling of like, wow, I get the privilege of talking with somebody who is it, like the real deal. And that's a high compliment, because I've read a lot of books. I continue to read a lot of books. I've read, what I would call masters of English in particular. And like Toni Morrison, like masters. And I was putting you up in there in terms of both the story, so the plot, in terms of the character development, in terms of the fact that I couldn't necessarily predict what was going to happen next, which is a hard thing to do in a detective novel. Because one thing that kind of grinds my gears is when I can predict the outcome. There were signs throughout the novel, like who did it, who done it, but there was no telltale signs where I was like, oh, definitely it's that person. I was right along with the detectives and trying to figure out like, who is it? So yeah, I can't commend you enough on what you've produced. I look forward to reading your next book, truly and sincerely. And I feel very honored that you spent some time with me today, Charles, and talked about things that you already know I'm really fascinated by, but also things that you're interested in. I feel very honored and privileged. Thank you so much.
Wow, I should thank you for for that compliment, because well, it's inspiring that you said that about my work, and I'm really grateful that someone would find my work interesting enough to read and enjoy it. I believe that when you do something in terms of writing, you do it very well. You write well. Like you said, when you're reading a novel and you can tell where it's going, there's no incentive to continue, which is the same thing for me. So I don't want to bore my audience with something that's been out where I can tell. And a lot of the time I can actually tell when I'm watching a movie or reading a novel. I can actually predict where it's going, probably because I'm a writer. So
Mm.
I may know what this person is up to, but I like to keep I like to keep my audience, I keep them gripped till the very end, and I want to give them a big payoff. That's why by the end of it all, I actually revealed how everything
Yeah.
happened. I didn't just
Yeah.
leave it hanging,
Yeah.
and so I'm so happy to be doing this with you, Dr. Mason. It's such a pleasure, talking with you, and I would say that you guys are smart. I mean, you guys are really, really, really smart. The Americans that I have interacted with, I think you're brilliant. You're brilliant. That's how I put it. And specifically yourself, you're just exceptional. I mean, you're able to change my mind on something. That's that's impressive. That's impressive. That's impressive. It goes to show the strength of your research, your logic, that you understand what you're doing. Because for you to be able to, your goal was to educate, and then you ended up persuading. It's something phenomenal, and I believe that the work you're doing is going to gain traction, and very soon it's going to be the norm. It's going to be the norm because there's so much potential. There's so much common sense that isn't really evident until you are exposed to it in your work, and I believe it's going to be great. So thank you, Dr. Mason, for having me. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. And by the way, my wife, I have to credit her because she edited it was a self-publishing novel, so she edited for me. So I have to give her some kudos too.
Yeah. Yes, and she really shines in that picture. That's one of the things I love the most about the author page, because it's you and her. What's her name, if I can ask?
Oh, her name is Choice.
Choice?
Yeah.
Choice. What a beautiful name, beautiful person. Like, your spirits really shine through on that image. So it gave me an even bigger payoff to, like, something made me go to the table of contents. I read the last page, then I went to the table of contents and saw there was more. So I'm glad the universe had me go to the table of contents to see that I was missing something, because that was even a bigger payoff. And to read about your aspirations and stuff, after having read the book, it just solidified in my mind, like, you are it. You are it, and I'm excited to see where your career in writing goes. We have a couple minutes, so I'm going to see if there are any other lingering questions in the chat box that we might answer, and then we'll conclude hopefully promptly at 7. Stanley's question I answered. Somebody, Mike, the dad Crosby, says this is the exact kind of discourse we should be able to have. Unfortunately, when our kids are relegated to affinity groups, we will lose the ability to discuss and connect. Absolutely. He also said, I didn't know that Meghan Markle was Black until she said she was, right? So there's this question of when people have to announce what race they are, it should highlight the sort of superficiality of it, right? But it often doesn't, unfortunately. Asta, thank you so much for your comment. You said teaching examples of race not being a defining characteristic would be interesting. Obviously, I agree. That's why I spend my days and evenings talking about this stuff. Excellent. It's so good to see the liveliness in the live chat. Thank y'all for coming and watching and participating with us and commenting. I really sincerely appreciate it. I know Charles does too. I just want to reiterate that the link to Charles's book is actually in the description box now. But after we conclude this live chat, I'm going to go into the description box and fill out the blanks. I'm going to include a link to his YouTube channel so you can check out his podcast. I definitely recommend his channel. He is bringing nuance to American situations. And then, of course, I hope you'll buy his book. If you do, let me know in the chat box, comment, and then come back and let me know after you've read it what you think, because I would love to hear you revel in the glory that is this book, Hotel Shendam. To everyone out there, I wish you love, light, and yes, liberation. Be well. Love each other. Bye.